I think we have two ways that'll happen. It'll either be a DNA match or someone who knows something will. The technology has advanced so far in the DNA world from 20 years ago. I think the Boulder police decided on day one that it was the parents that did this horrible thing.
Police departments don't like to admit they've been wrong or they screwed up, and I can't believe that with the new police chief. I mean, he didn't cause that problem. He didn't mess it up.
They say DNA can solve this case, and the very people who were supposed to protect the evidence destroyed it. They went even further, manipulating the media to make sure you'd believe it too. Forensic experts now say DNA means nothing here, keeping focus on more practical evidence. So is this really a DNA case, or just a distraction? Who's actually leading us away from the truth? And what is DNAX? The only DNA evidence that has been hidden for years. The JonBenéт Ramsey case is a labyrinth of evidence that, despite its abundance, has failed to yield a definitive conclusion, leaving investigators and the public entangled in a web of speculation and dead ends. The sheer volume of physical and circumstantial clues, ranging from a ransom note to household items and suspicious behaviors, creates a paradox. An overwhelming amount of evidence that points in multiple directions yet resolves nothing. Each piece, whether tied to family members or the possibility of an intruder, collapses under scrutiny, revealing the fragility of the case's foundation. It may sound ironic, but the more evidence we have, the more questions arise, not answers. And this puts us in a position of relying on DNA, the only potential evidence at the moment. John Andrew Ramsey, John's 19-year-old son from a previous marriage, was initially considered a suspect due to his connection to the household and a peculiar discovery in the basement. A suitcase, positioned under a broken basement window, contained a white blanket stained with semen later identified as John Andrews, alongside a Dr. Seuss book, an odd inclusion for a college student. This finding, documented in police crime scene photographs, raised questions about whether the suitcase and its contents were related to the murder, part of a staged scene, or simply incidental. John Ramsey himself noted the suitcase was out of place, claiming he had moved it to the basement, but not positioned it against the window, suggesting someone else might have placed it there, to imply an intruder's entry or exit. However, John Andrews' alibi, confirmed by plane tickets and witnesses placing him in Atlanta, thousands of miles away, was airtight, dismantling any direct link to the crime. The semen-stained blanket, while shocking, could reflect nothing more than a college student's personal habits, unrelated to the murder. No fingerprints, blood, or other physical evidence tied the suitcase or blanket to JonBenét's death, leaving this clue as a provocative but inconclusive dead end. The ransom note, a 3-page letter demanding $11,000, the exact amount of John Ramsey's bonus, further complicates the case. Found by Patsy on the staircase, its length, deliberate misspellings, and use of household paper suggested staging. For John Ramsey, the note's precise demand fueled suspicions of his involvement, yet no fingerprints or definitive handwriting analysis linked him to it. His actions at the scene deepened distrust. Upon finding JonBenét's body in the basement, he removed duct tape from her mouth, untied her wrists, and carried her upstairs, disrupting potential evidence like fingerprints or fibers. John's claim that the family slept normally on December 1996 and heard nothing unusual, coupled with his initial reluctance to cooperate fully with police, intensified scrutiny. However, no physical evidence, blood, fibers, or a confirmed weapon directly implicated him, rendering his actions suspicious but not incriminating. Patsy Ramsey's role in discovering the ransom note and making the 911 call drew equal suspicion. Handwriting experts noted similarities between her writing and the note's script, but conflicting analyses and the absence of fingerprints or other direct evidence stalled this lead. Her wearing the same clothes from the previous night during the 911 call, unusual for someone known to change outfits, and a faint voice in the call, suspected to be Burke's, contradicting claims he was asleep, added to the intrigue. A bowl of pineapple in the kitchen, bearing Patsy's and Burke's fingerprints, suggested JonBenét was awake before her death, as pineapple was found in her stomach. Yet, these fingerprints were expected in a family kitchen, and the pineapple's presence proved nothing beyond her last meal, failing to connect Patsy to the crime. Burke Ramsay, only 9 at the time, was central to theories suggesting he accidentally killed his sister, perhaps over a dispute. The pineapple bowl, with his fingerprints, fueled speculation of a sibling altercation, with some theorizing he struck JonBenét with a flashlight found in the house. The flashlight, a potential match for her head wound, bore no blood, fingerprints, or hair, making it speculative. Burke's alleged presence in the 911 call and his detached demeanor in later interviews raised questions, but shock or personality could explain his behavior. No physical evidence, weapon, blood, or fibers tied him to the crime scene, leaving these clues as mere conjecture. The intruder theory, supported by figures like Detective Lou Smith, hinges on the broken basement window and the suitcase beneath it, which Smith believed an intruder used to enter or exit. However, no footprints in the snow, foreign fingerprints, or fibers supported this. Marks on JonBenét's body, possibly from a stun gun, and the rope and duct tape used to bind her were inconclusive, as the marks weren't distinctive, and the materials could have come from the house. A rope found in a guest bedroom, unclaimed by the Ramsays, hinted at an outsider, but lacked connecting evidence. Suspects like Michael Helgoth, who owned a stun gun and died mysteriously days later, and John Mark Carr, who confessed in 2006, fell apart under scrutiny. Helgoth had no physical link to the scene, and Carr's confession contradicted known facts. The case's failure to resolve stems from systemic flaws. John's handling of the body and the police's failure to secure the crime scene obliterated potential evidence. The absence of a clear murder weapon, identifiable foreign materials, or a coherent motive, kidnapping, revenge, or accident, thwarted progress. The ransom note, likely staged, undermined both family and intruder theories without identifying an author. Testimonies, from the Ramsays' vague accounts to Carr's false confession, lacked corroboration and behavioral clues, like Patsy's clothing or the suitcase's placement, were too ambiguous for court. This flood of evidence creates a paradox, a case rich in clues yet devoid of answers. Despite the extensive investigation, the myriad clues have only deepened the mystery, each one unraveling into ambiguity without providing a clear path to resolution. In the midst of these persistent dead ends, DNA stands as the only evidence that continues to hold potential. It remains the focal point of ongoing analysis and research, offering a glimmer of hope for a breakthrough in a case that has defied closure for decades. One of the most discussed pieces of DNA evidence was the DNA discovered beneath JonBenét's fingernails on both her left and right hands. Forensic analysis conducted by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation identified 2 distinct components within this DNA sample. The primary component was consistent with JonBenét's own genetic profile, confirming that it originated from her. However, a secondary component, referred to as a minor component, was also detected, indicating the presence of foreign DNA. This minor component was determined to be from a male source, a finding that sparked considerable interest among investigators and forensic experts. To further analyze this evidence, the samples were sent to Cellmark Diagnostics, a prominent DNA testing laboratory known for its work in high-profile cases. Cellmark's analysis corroborated the CBI's findings, confirming that the primary DNA source was female, aligning with JonBenét's profile, while the secondary source was male. Importantly, this male DNA did not match any members of the Ramsay family, including John, Patsy, Burke, Melinda, or John Andrew Ramsay. The discovery of this foreign male DNA under JonBenét's fingernails suggested the possibility that she had physical contact with an unknown individual, potentially linked to her death. The presence of this DNA was documented in various reports, including those from the CBI and Cellmark, and was later highlighted in legal documents such as the Carnes order from the 2003 Wolf vs. Ramsay civil case. These findings fueled speculation about an unidentified male's involvement, as the DNA provided a tangible clue that investigators hoped could lead to a suspect. In addition to the DNA found under JonBenét's fingernails, another significant piece of evidence was the DNA discovered on her underwear. Forensic examination revealed the presence of foreign decommingled with this blood, which, like the DNA under her fingernails, was identified as originating from a male. This finding was particularly compelling because the DNA was mixed with JonBenét's blood, suggesting a direct association with the violent act that led to her death. The CBI conducted initial testing on the underwear, and the results were later verified by Cellmark Diagnostics. Both laboratories confirmed that the foreign DNA did not match the genetic profiles of John, Patsy, Burke, Melinda, or John Andrew Ramsey. Furthermore, the DNA was compared to that of Chris Wolfe, a former journalist named as a suspect in Ramsey's book, The Death of Innocence. But no match was found. This exclusion of known individuals heightened the significance of the DNA evidence, as it pointed to an unknown male who could be connected to the crime scene. The DNA profile from the underwear was entered into a national database, maintained by the FBI, in hopes of finding a match with existing records, but no matches were reported at the time. This evidence was frequently cited by the Ramsey family's attorney, Lynn Wood, as a critical piece of the investigation, emphasizing its potential to identify the perpetrator. The DNA evidence from both the fingernails and the underwear was analyzed with advanced techniques available at the time, including polymerase chain reaction methods, which allowed for the amplification of small DNA samples. The CBI's agent Catherine Dressel, a DNA and serological testing expert with 25 years of experience, played a key role in the initial analysis. Her findings indicated that if the minor component of the DNA under JonBenét's fingernails originated from a single individual, it excluded all Ramsey family members whose samples were tested. Similarly, the DNA on the underwear was subjected to rigorous testing, with results consistently showing no connection to the Ramsey family. These findings were significant enough to be sent to Cellmark Diagnostics for independent verification, ensuring the reliability of the results. The involvement of Cellmark, a laboratory recognized for its work in the O.J. Simpson trial, added credibility to the analysis. The laboratory's reports confirmed that the DNA on the underwear was not only foreign, but also commingled with JonBenét's blood, a detail that underscored its potential relevance to the crime. This commingling suggested that the foreign DNA was deposited at or near the time of the assault, making it a focal point for investigators seeking to identify an external perpetrator. The DNA evidence from both locations was referenced in multiple sources throughout the investigation, including media reports and legal documents. For instance, a Rocky Mountain News article from February 2, 1997, detailed the forensic efforts to analyze body fluids, hair, and other traces, noting the presence of blood and possibly semen at the scene. Though later tests clarified that no semen was found on the underwear, the coroner's order from March 31, 2003, explicitly mentioned the unidentified DNA under JonBenét's fingernails and in her underwear, reinforcing its importance in arguing for the presence of an intruder. Similarly, the Bonetta papers from 2004, compiled by a legal secretary with access to Boulder Police Department reports, documented the DNA findings, noting that the male DNA did not match any Ramsey family members. These consistent findings across different analyses suggested that the DNA could belong to an individual who had direct contact with JonBenét during the crime, though no definitive identification was made. The white blanket found covering JonBenét's body in the basement was another item subjected to forensic analysis, with findings that would trace evidence potentially relevant to the investigation. According to the Bonetta papers and the coroner's order from March 31, 2003, 2 hairs were recovered from the blanket, one identified as a Caucasian pubic or auxiliary hair, and another as a human head hair several inches long. Serological studies conducted on the blanket, as noted in the Bonetta papers, found no evidence of semen, indicating that the blanket did not yield biological fluids typically associated with sexual assault. Critically, the provided documents do not explicitly state that DNA was extracted or analyzed directly from the blanket itself. The focus on the hairs, particularly the Caucasian pubic hair, suggests that these were the primary biological traces examined, with DNA analysis likely performed on the hairs rather than the blanket's surface. The Carnes order highlights the unmatched pubic hair as evidence supporting the possibility of an intruder. But it does not confirm DNA extraction from the blanket fabric. The absence of reported DNA on the blanket's surface could be due to the lack of recoverable biological material or the prioritization of other evidence, such as the hairs, in the forensic process. Now for the hidden DNA part, a piece of evidence that was hidden for much of the key time of the investigation, the DNAX. This DNA was discovered at the crime scene, but was not located on JonBenét's body or clothing, distinguishing it from the more widely discussed DNA found under her fingernails and on her underwear. The myth of this evidence is that the precise location of DNAX remains undisclosed, adding a layer of mystery to its role in the investigation. What makes DNAX particularly compelling is the timing of its discovery, which occurred after September 1998, following the commencement of the grand jury proceedings. This was notably later than the initial collection of other DNA samples, such as those from Chris Wolfe, a journalist named as a suspect by the Ramsays, which were obtained in early 1998. The delayed discovery of DNAX suggests it was either overlooked in earlier sweeps of the crime scene or identified through subsequent, more detailed forensic analysis. By the year 2000, the results of DNAX testing became known, indicating that significant time was required to process and analyze this sample, possibly due to its complexity or the need for advanced techniques not immediately available at the time of the crime. The analysis of DNAX was conducted at the FBI's laboratory, a departure from the standard procedure for other DNA samples in the case, which were primarily handled by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. The decision to send DNAX to the FBI was deliberate, with an unspecified reason guiding this choice, hinting at the sample's unique significance or the need for specialized expertise. The FBI's involvement underscores the gravity of DNAX, as their laboratory was likely equipped to handle complex or sensitive evidence that required federal resources or access to broader databases. During the analysis, DNAX was compared to the genetic profiles of several individuals, including John and Patsy Ramsey, as well as Chris Wolfe. The results confirmed that DNAX did not match Wolfe's DNA, nor was it reported to match the Ramsays, ruling them out as the source. Additionally, the sample was compared to other unspecified individuals, though no details about their identities were provided. The fact that DNAX was subjected to such extensive comparisons suggests that investigators viewed it as a critical piece of evidence, potentially capable of identifying an unknown individual present at the crime scene. The handling of DNAX followed a meticulous process to ensure the integrity of the evidence. Once DNA markers were identified, these markers, rather than the physical sample, were sent from the CBI or Boulder Police Department to the FBI for comparison. This method preserved the original sample while allowing for cross-referencing with existing profiles. The careful management of DNAX reflects the investigators' awareness of its potential importance, even if its exact role in the case remained unclear. The FBI's early involvement in the case, combined with their role in testing DNAX, indicates that this sample was treated with a high degree of scrutiny, possibly because it represented a new lead that emerged well after the initial investigation. The results of these tests were known by 2000, were not publicly elaborated upon, leaving open questions about what, if anything, was conclusively determined about DNAX's origin. One of the most intriguing aspects of DNAX is the secrecy surrounding its source. When questioned about whether the origin of DNAX had been identified, the Boulder police chief refused to answer, citing the potential harm to the ongoing investigation. This refusal, backed by legal privilege, suggests that DNAX held sensitive information that could not be disclosed without risking the case's progress. The invocation of privilege that investigators may have had suspicions or knowledge about the source of DNAX, perhaps linking it to a specific individual or context that required confidentiality. This guarded approach contrasts with the more open discussions of other DNA evidence, such as that found on JonBenét's underwear, and fuels speculation that DNAX could be a pivotal clue, potentially pointing to a suspect who was not publicly acknowledged. Speculation about DNAX has been rife, particularly in online forums where amateur sleuths and case enthusiasts have debated its significance. One theory posits that DNAX may have already been matched to an individual, given the police chief's reluctance to confirm or deny such a match. The refusal to state that no match was found could imply that a match existed but was withheld for strategic reasons, perhaps to protect the investigation or avoid public scrutiny. Another speculation suggests that DNAX might be linked to a hair sample, possibly one associated with Patsy Ramsay, though no concrete evidence supports this claim. The designation DNAX itself is intriguing, potentially indicating its unknown status. An external source distinct from the victim, or an extra sample beyond the primary DNA findings. These interpretations, while speculative, highlight the enigmatic nature of DNAX and its potential to disrupt the prevailing narrative of the case. The secrecy surrounding DNAX extends to its location at the crime scene, which was never specified. This lack of transparency has led to numerous theories about where it might have been found. Possibilities include the paintbrush handle used in the nylon cord, the duct tape removed from JonBenét's mouth, the nylon cord, or its knots, or even the white blanket covering her body. If DNAX were found on one of these items, particularly those directly involved in the crime, it could serve as a smoking gun linking an individual to the act. The refusal to disclose its location suggests that revealing this detail could compromise the investigation, perhaps by alerting a suspect or exposing a critical piece of evidence prematurely. The choice to send DNAX to the FBI rather than the CBI further fuels speculation that it required specialized handling, possibly due to its connection to a federal database or a suspect with ties to a broader investigation. Another layer of speculation arises from the timing of DNAX's discovery and its implications for the case's direction. Found after the grand jury began its work, DNAX emerged at a time when the investigation was heavily focused on the Ramsey family, particularly Patsy Ramsay, as potential suspects. The existence of DNAX, which did not match the Ramseys, could have challenged this narrative, pointing instead to an external perpetrator. The decision to keep DNAX under wraps for years, with its existence only becoming public knowledge by late 2002, suggests that it may have posed a threat to the initial investigative theory. If DNAX were linked to an outsider, it could have forced a reevaluation of the case, undermining the focus on the family and potentially exposing oversights in the early investigation. The silence surrounding DNAX may have been a strategic move to maintain the integrity of the police's original hypothesis, or to avoid public pressure for a shift in focus. The possibility that DNAX matched an individual who was protected or untouchable adds another dimension to the speculation. This could include someone with political or legal influence, a figure within the Ramseys' social circle, or even a law enforcement official involved in the case. The refusal to confirm or deny a match, combined with the use of legal privilege, suggests that revealing the truth about DNAX could have significant consequences, such as a public backlash or the need to reopen the entire investigation. Alternatively, DNAX might have been a strong piece of evidence but insufficient for prosecution, perhaps due to an incomplete profile or legal barriers. The lack of public disclosure could reflect the police's inability to act on the evidence without causing undue speculation or compromising other leads. The enduring mystery of DNAX lies in its potential to be a game changer in the case. Its analysis by the FBI, its comparison to multiple individuals, and the secrecy surrounding its results all point to its significance. Yet, the lack of transparency leaves open the possibility that DNAX holds the key to identifying the perpetrator, a truth that remains hidden due to investigative constraints, political considerations, or the need to protect the case's integrity. As long as the details of DNAX remain undisclosed, it continues to be a focal point for speculation, representing both a hope for resolution and a reminder of the case's unresolved complexities. However, if DNA evidence were truly viable, one might expect the JonBenéт Ramsey case to have been resolved in mere minutes following a test, not left lingering for nearly 3 decades. What issues have arisen with this evidence? And how have they impacted its critical role in the investigation? One of the primary challenges is that the DNA found at the crime scene, particularly the foreign DNA under JonBenét's fingernails and on her underwear, lacks clear incriminating value. While this DNA did not match any members of the Ramsey family, John, Patsy, Burke, Melinda, or John Andrew, it does not definitively rule them out as suspects. The presence of foreign DNA could stem from innocuous sources, such as prior contact during a Christmas party, interactions with friends, or even casual encounters with strangers. Additionally, the movement of JonBenét's body by her father and others at the scene introduced the possibility of post-mortem contamination. The crime scene was not properly secured, allowing multiple individuals, including family members, friends, and police officers, to interact with it without adequate forensic protections. This lack of control over the scene compromised the integrity of the DNA evidence, making it difficult to determine whether it originated from a perpetrator or from incidental contact, thus reducing its utility in pinpointing a specific individual responsible for the crime. Another critical issue is the nature of the DNA samples themselves, which forensic experts have identified as composite DNA, meaning they are mixtures from multiple sources rather than a single individual. This complexity renders the DNA unsuitable for definitively identifying a specific suspect. The presence of multiple contributors in a DNA sample complicates the process of isolating a unique genetic profile, as the markers may overlap or be incomplete. Legally and scientifically, relying on composite DNA to exclude individuals, such as the Ramsey family, is problematic because it cannot provide the precision needed for courtroom evidence. The composite nature of the DNA found in the case, particularly under JonBenét's fingernails, means that it cannot be used to conclusively point to one person, undermining its value as a definitive clue. This limitation has been a significant hurdle for investigators, as it prevents the DNA from serving as a reliable tool for either identifying a perpetrator or fully exonerating any particular individual, despite public and legal arguments to the contrary. The crime scene itself presented substantial challenges due to heavy contamination, further diminishing the reliability of the DNA evidence. Key pieces of physical evidence, such as the ransom note, flashlight pen, and paintbrush handle used in the nylon cord, yielded no DNA or fingerprints. The absence of biological traces on these items is notable, given their direct involvement in the crime. The crime scene was compromised early on by the presence of numerous people, family, friendlies, who moved through the house without proper forensic protocols in place. This trampling of the scene, as described in forensic analyses, meant that any potential DNA or other trace evidence was likely contaminated or lost. The failure to immediately secure the crime scene allowed for the introduction of extraneous biological material, making it nearly impossible to establish a clear chain of custody for the evidence. This contamination has rendered many items, including those central to the crime, forensically unreliable, as they cannot be confidently linked to a specific individual or sequence of events. Public perception of DNA evidence in the case has been heavily influenced by what is often referred to as the C effect, where media portrayals lead people to believe that DNA is always conclusive and infallible. In reality, particularly in cases involving family members or close acquaintances, DNA is often less useful because its presence in a shared living space is expected. In the Ramsey household, finding DNA from family members would be unremarkable, as they lived together and shared the environment. The critical investigative focus should be on behavior, motive, and psychological dynamics, rather than solely relying on biological evidence. The public's overemphasis on DNA as a definitive solution has has skewed expectations, overshadowing the need for a broader analysis of other evidence, such as the ransom note's authorship or the timeline of events, which might provide more insight into the crime than the ambiguous DNA findings. The possibility of rectifying these DNA-related issues is slim, primarily due to the irreversible damage done to the crime scene and evidence from the outset. The body was moved multiple times, first by John Ramsey and later during police handling, which introduced significant contamination risks. Dozens of people accessed the crime scene without proper forensic safeguards, further compromising potential evidence. The initial investigators, lacking sufficient experience, failed to secure the scene, allowing critical items like the paintbrush handle and ransom note to lose their forensic integrity. The paintbrush handle, touched by multiple individuals, cannot be retested with reliable results, and the ransom note, devoid of DNA or fingerprints, offers no new leads. Advanced techniques like touch DNA analysis, which can detect minute traces of genetic material, are unlikely to help because the original samples have been mishandled or degraded. Independent forensic experts have been reluctant to reanalyze the evidence due to concerns about accuracy and the lack of pristine samples. Even national DNA databases are ineffective for composite samples, as they require clear, single-source profiles for accurate matching. The mishandling of evidence in the critical early stages of the investigation has effectively closed the door on using DNA to resolve the case definitively. Despite these challenges, there are faint glimmers of hope from advancements in forensic technology that could potentially address some of the DNA issues. Ultrasensitive DNA analysis techniques can now amplify extremely small samples, sometimes as little as 10 picograms, and separate mixed DNA profiles that were previously indecipherable. However, this requires samples to be intact and properly preserved, a condition unlikely to be met given the contamination in this case. Forensic genetic genealogy, which has solved cold cases like that of the Golden State Killer by tracing DNA to familial connections, offers another possibility. Yet, the degraded and mixed nature of the Ramsey case DNA makes this approach difficult, as it requires a clear, complete profile. Artificial intelligence tools for analyzing crime scene data could potentially identify overlooked patterns or correlations across cases, but the destroyed state of the crime scene limits their effectiveness. Recent legal developments, such as Colorado's Homicide Victims' Families' Rights Act of 2021, have enabled families to request case reviews, prompting the formation of an independent investigative team to re-examine the Ramsey case. While these advancements offer some hope, the fundamental damage to the DNA evidence, caused by early mishandling and contamination, remains a formidable barrier, leaving the resolution of the case heavily reliant on non-DNA evidence or an unlikely breakthrough in forensic reanalysis. John Ramsey's public appearances in interviews over the nearly 3 decades since the murder of his daughter, JonBenét Ramsey, have been a calculated effort to shape public opinion, deflect suspicion from his family, and maintain pressure on law enforcement to pursue the case. From his first televised interview on 7 in 1997 to his more recent discussions on platforms like Netflix's Cold Case, Who Killed JonBenet Ramsey in 2024, and CBS's 48 Hours, Ramsey has consistently used the media to craft a narrative of a grieving father seeking justice while battling an incompetent police force and a sensationalist press. However, certain statements and actions during these interviews reveal a pattern of negative framing that can be interpreted as attempts to manipulate public perception, discredit alternative investigative paths, or shift focus away from unresolved questions about the family's involvement. By emphasizing specific aspects of the case, such as DNA evidence, while dismissing other leads or criticizing key stakeholders, Ramsey's rhetoric often carries an undercurrent of defensiveness and selective storytelling that risks alienating audiences and undermining the broader pursuit of truth. In his earliest public appearance on Shin on January 1, 1997, just days after JonBenét's death, John Ramsey, alongside his wife Patsy, presented himself as a devastated parent desperate for answers. The couple's decision to speak publicly so soon after the tragedy was unusual, especially given that they had not yet fully cooperated with police interviews. Ramsay's plea for public help in finding the killer was heartfelt, but his simultaneous criticism of media scrutiny set a tone of confrontation. By framing the press as intrusive and irresponsible, he began to construct a narrative that positioned the Ramsay family as victims not only of a heinous crime, but also of a predatory media landscape. This early move can be seen as negatively leading because it deflected attention from the family, limited cooperation with law enforcement, which had already raised suspicions. Instead of addressing why they delayed formal police interviews, Ramsay's focus on media misbehavior suggested an attempt to redirect public scrutiny toward external entities, fostering a sense of sympathy for the family while sidestepping questions about their own actions. As the years progressed, Ramsay's interviews increasingly centered on the role of DNA evidence, particularly after advancements in genetic genealogy offered new hope for solving cold cases. In his 2024 Netflix documentary appearance, Ramsay passionately advocated for retesting DNA samples using modern genealogical techniques, listing specific items like the nylon cord, a rope, and a blanket as potential sources of the killer's genetic material. His insistence that DNA is the key to solving the case, reiterated in outlets like 48 Hours and Ken in 2025, reflects a strategic focus on a scientific solution that aligns with the intruder theory he has long championed. However, this singular emphasis on DNA can be viewed as negatively leading because it marginalizes other investigative avenues, such as the ransom note's authorship or behavioral inconsistencies at the crime scene. By presenting DNA as the sole path to resolution, Ramsay risks creating the impression that any investigation not centered on genetic evidence is misguided or irrelevant. This approach encourages scrutiny of other evidence, including the ransom note, which some experts believe bears similarities to Patsy Ramsay's handwriting, or the lack of forced entry at the crime scene, which complicates the intruder narrative. His fixation on DNA thus serves as both a call for justice and a shield against broader questions about the case. Another troubling aspect of Ramsay's media presence is his handling of potentially contradictory evidence, particularly regarding DNA. In a 2025 interview, he referenced a former Boulder detective's claim that DNA samples at the crime scene might have been contaminated, a revelation that could undermine the reliability of the very evidence he champions. Simultaneously, he disclosed that a DNA sample from a jacket found in the attic matched his own, a detail that could fuel speculation about his involvement. By raising the possibility of contamination while selectively highlighting DNA that supports his narrative, Ramsay introduces ambiguity that complicates the case without resolving it. This move can be seen as negatively leading because it casts doubt on the integrity of the investigation's forensic evidence, while failing to clarify how his own DNA presence fits into the broader picture. The selective disclosure of such details risks creating confusion among viewers, who may question the validity of all DNA evidence rather than focusing on specific, actionable leads. It also reinforces the perception that Ramsay is curating the narrative to emphasize his innocence rather than pursuing a comprehensive examination of all facts. As the years progressed, Ramsay's interviews increasingly centered on the role of DNA evidence, particularly after advancements in genetic genealogy offered new hope for solving cold cases. In his 2024 Netflix documentary appearance, Ramsay passionately advocated for retesting DNA samples using modern genealogical techniques, listing specific items like the nylon cord, a rope, and a blanket as potential sources of the killer's genetic material. His insistence that DNA is the key to solving the case, reiterated in outlets like 48 Hours and CNN in 2025, reflects a strategic focus on a scientific solution that aligns with the intruder theory he has long championed. However, this singular emphasis on DNA can be viewed as negatively leading, because it marginalizes other investigative avenues, such as the ransom note's authorship or behavioral inconsistencies at the crime scene. By presenting DNA as the sole path to resolution, Ramsay risks creating the impression that any investigation not centered on genetic evidence is misguided or irrelevant. This approach subtly discourages scrutiny of other evidence, including the ransom note, which some experts believe bears similarities to Patsy Ramsey's handwriting, or the lack of forced entry at the crime scene, which complicates the intruder narrative. His fixation on DNA thus serves as both a call for justice and a shield against broader questions about the case. Another troubling aspect of Ramsey's media presence is his handling of potentially contradictory evidence, particularly regarding DNA. In a 2025 interview, he referenced a former Boulder detective's claim that DNA samples at the crime scene might have been contaminated, a revelation that could undermine the reliability of the very evidence he champions. Simultaneously, he disclosed that a DNA sample from a jacket found in the attic matched his own, a detail that could fuel speculation about his involvement. By raising the possibility of contamination while selectively highlighting DNA that supports his narrative, Ramsey introduces ambiguity that complicates the case without resolving it. This move can be seen as negatively leading because it casts doubt on the integrity of the investigation's forensic evidence, while verifying how his own DNA presence fits into the broader picture. The selective disclosure of such details risks creating confusion among viewers, who may question the validity of all DNA evidence rather than focusing on specific, actionable leads. It also reinforces the perception that Ramsey is curating the narrative to emphasize his innocence rather than pursuing a comprehensive examination of all facts. Ramsey's dismissive attitude toward public skepticism also carries a negative undertone. In his 2024 Denver 7 interview, he claimed that the 5% of people who suspect him are insignificant and do not affect him, while simultaneously lamenting the damage to his family's reputation. This contradictory stance, downplaying public doubt while highlighting its harm, can come across as disingenuous, as it minimizes the mimic questions many have about the case. The Ramsey family's behavior, such as their initial media shy approach, followed by high-profile interviews, and their hiring of a public relations firm, has long fueled speculation. By brushing off skeptics as a small, irrelevant minority, Ramsey risks alienating a portion of the public whose support could be valuable in generating new tips or pressure for further investigation. His rhetoric suggests a defensiveness that may deter open dialogue about the case, reinforcing a divide between those who believe the Ramseys and those who remain unconvinced. Perhaps most concerning is Ramsey's portrayal of himself as a lone crusader for justice, a theme that runs through his recent interviews, such as those on NBC and Ken in 2025. He frequently highlights his personal efforts to meet with new police leadership, bring in DNA experts, and fund private investigations, positioning himself as the driving force behind any progress in the case. While these actions demonstrate commitment, they also carry a subtle implication that without his intervention, the case would languish. This framing can be negatively leading because it diminishes the efforts of others, including detectives, forensic experts, and advocacy groups who have worked on the case over the years. It also risks creating a cult of personality around Ramsey, where his narrative overshadows the objective pursuit of truth. By centering himself in the story, he may inadvertently discourage collaborative efforts, as law enforcement or independent investigators might feel their contributions are undervalued or scrutinized through the lens of Ramsey's approval. In sum, John Ramsey's interviews reflect a multifaceted effort to steer public opinion toward his version of events: a grieving family wronged by a botched investigation and a killer still at large, identifiable only through DNA. Yet, his rhetoric often veers into negative territory, whether through sharp critiques of the police, selective emphasis on DNA, ambiguous handling of contradictory evidence, or dismissive attitudes toward skeptics. These elements suggest a strategy not only to clear his family's name, but also to control the narrative in ways that limit scrutiny of alternative theories or unresolved questions. While Ramsey's pain and determination are undeniable, his approach risks polarizing audiences, undermining trust in institutions, and narrowing the scope of a case that remains frustratingly complex. As he continues to advocate for justice, the challenge lies in balancing his personal narrative with an openness to all possibilities, lest his efforts to lead public opinion inadvertently obscure the path to the truth about JonBenét's killer. The JonBenét Ramsey case, which began with the discovery of the 6-year-old's body in her family's Boulder, Colorado home on December 26, 1996, has been marked by accusations of mishandling and lack of transparency by the Boulder Police Department. From the outset, the investigation was plagued by procedural errors that raised questions about whether critical information was deliberately withheld or lost due to incompetence. Former Boulder Police Chief Mark Beckner admitted in a 2015 AMA that the crime scene was mishandled, noting that officers failed to the scene properly and did not immediately obtain full statements from John and Patsy Ramsey. This allowed friends and family to move through the house, potentially contaminating evidence, and delayed formal interviews with the parents in May 1997, 5 months after the murder. Beckner's acknowledgement suggests that early investigative missteps could have led to a lack of clarity in public disclosures, but whether this constituted deliberate concealment or mere negligence is less clear. The failure to secure the crime scene and the delay in interviewing key witnesses, like the Ramsays, fueled public suspicion that the police were either hiding their own mistakes or protecting certain individuals. One of the most persistent allegations of concealment centers on the handling of DNA evidence. Early in the investigation, DNA found under JonBenét's fingernails and on her clothing was tested and determined not to match any members of the Ramsey family, including John, Patsy, and their son Burke. This finding, detailed in a 1997 Colorado Bureau of Investigation report, was not publicly disclosed for years, even as the police continued to treat the Ramseys as primary suspects. John Ramsey himself claimed in a 2025 NBC interview that the police kept these DNA results secret from both the district attorney and the family, suggesting that the information conflicted with the police's initial theory that the Ramseys were responsible. This withholding of exculpatory DNA evidence could be interpreted as an attempt to maintain a narrative that focused on the family, possibly to avoid admitting that the investigation was pursuing the wrong leads. Critics, including retired investigator Lou Smith, argued that the police's fixation on the Ramseys led them to downplay or ignore evidence pointing to an intruder, such as a broken basement window and a shoe print from a high-tech boot that did not belong to anyone in the household. By not sharing the DNA results promptly, the police may have been protecting their initial hypothesis, which could be seen as a form of concealment driven by confirmation bias, rather than a deliberate cover-up for a specific individual. The question of who the police investigated that might have prompted concealment is complicated by the sheer number of leads pursued. Over 25,000 tips, letters, and emails, with interviews conducted across 19 states. According to a 2023 Boulder Police Department update, the Ramseys were the primary focus early on, partly due to the unusual circumstances of the case. A ransom note demanding $118,000, nearly identical to John Ramsey's Christmas bonus, the lack of clear signs of forced entry, and the family's initial reluctance to cooperate fully with police. A 1999 grand jury recommended indicting John and Patsy Ramsey for child endangerment and obstruction of a murder investigation, but District Attorney Alex Hunter declined to prosecute, citing insufficient evidence. The grand jury's findings were not made public until 2013, raising questions about why such significant information was kept under wraps for so long. One possible explanation is that the police and DA wanted to avoid further public backlash or legal challenges from the Ramseys, who had substantial financial resources and legal representation. Concealing the grand jury's recommendations could have been a strategic move to protect the investigation's integrity or to avoid defamation lawsuits, as the Ramseys later filed such suits against media outlets. Beyond the Ramseys, the police investigated a wide range of individuals, including family, friends, neighbors, and even confessed suspects like John Mark Carr, who was arrested in 2006, but cleared when his DNA did not match the crime scene evidence. The investigation into Carr, who falsely claimed to have drugged and killed JonBené, highlights another instance where the police's handling of information appeared secretive. Carr's confession was initially treated with skepticism by investigators like Beckner. Yet the case received significant media attention before his release, suggesting that the police may have allowed the narrative to persist temporarily to gauge public or investigative outcomes. This could indicate a pattern of selective disclosure, where certain investigative details were withheld to control the narrative or avoid premature conclusions. Other persons of interest, such as a neighbor who played Santa Claus and employees at John Ramsey's company, Access Graphics, were also investigated, but little information about these inquiries was released publicly. The police's reluctance to share details about these suspects could stem from a desire to protect innocent individuals or to avoid tipping off a potential perpetrator, but it also contributed to perceptions of secrecy. The Boulder police's interactions with external investigators, such as Lou Smith, further complicate the narrative of concealment. Smith, hired by the DA's office, resigned in 1998, citing frustration with the police's refusal to consider the intruder theory. He compiled a list of 887 potential suspects, which his family continues to investigate, but claimed the police ignored critical evidence like the unidentified male DNA and stun gun marks on JonBenét's body. Smith's resignation letter accused the police of focusing solely on the Ramsays, while a very dangerous killer remained at large. This suggests that the police may have concealed or downplayed evidence that contradicted their primary theory, possibly to maintain public comments in their approach or to avoid admitting errors. John Ramsey echoed this sentiment in a 2024 60 Minutes interview, alleging that the police made up their mind on day one that he and Patsy were guilty, ignoring conflicting evidence. If true, this tunnel vision could have led to the suppression of alternative leads, not necessarily to protect a specific individual, but to uphold a flawed investigative framework. Another factor contributing to perceptions of concealment is the Boulder police's limited public statements due to the case's ongoing status. In a 2024 statement to People, Chief Stephen Redfern emphasized that the department was actively pursuing leads and working with DNA experts, but he declined to provide specifics, citing the need to preserve the investigation's integrity. This stance, while standard for active cases, has frustrated observers like John Ramsey, who has publicly called for independent DNA testing. The police's 2024 rebuttal to Ramsey's claim that they were not testing evidence, the assertion that there is viable evidence and leads we are not pursuing, to include DNA testing, is completely false, suggests a defensive posture, possibly to counter accusations of inaction or concealment. However, their refusal to disclose specific actions or results leaves room for speculation that they are withholding information to avoid scrutiny of past mistakes, or to protect the investigation from external pressure. The possibility that the police concealed results to shield specific individuals is less straightforward. While the Ramsays were cleared by DNA evidence in 2008, the initial focus on them may have been driven by their wealth, influence, and unusual behavior, such as hiring lawyers and delaying interviews. Concealing exculpatory DNA evidence early on could have been an attempt to maintain pressure on the family without public backlash. Alternatively, the police may have withheld details about other suspects, such as employees at Access Graphics, who might have known about John's bonus or individuals linked to the pageant world, to avoid compromising ongoing inquiries or exposing investigative weaknesses. The disciplinary action against 5 officers, including lead investigator Thomas Trujillo in 2022, for failing to fully investigate cases, adds another layer of complexity. John Andrew Ramsey, JonBenét's half-brother, suggested that Trujillo's reassignment reflected negligence, possibly including untested DNA or ignored leads, which could indicate a broader pattern of withholding information to cover departmental shortcomings. The JonBenét Ramsey case has remained a polarizing and unresolved mystery. with significant developments shaping public perception over the years. In 2008, John and Patsy Ramsey were officially cleared as suspects by the Boulder District Attorney, based on DNA evidence that did not match any family members. However, the intense media scrutiny and early investigative focus on the Ramseys have left a lasting divide in public opinion, with many still questioning their involvement. Additionally, Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's brother, pursued legal action against media outlets for falsely implicating him, further highlighting the case's contentious legacy. This response examines these points in a narrative format, using American English, analyzing the DNA exoneration, the public's divided reaction due to initial media influence, and Burke's lawsuits against media defamation, while addressing any potentially negative framing in the family's actions. In July 2008, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey issued a formal letter exonerating John, Patsy, and Burke Ramsey in the murder of JonBené. The decision was based on advanced DNA testing conducted by Boulder Technology, which analyzed a previously untested sample of male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing, specifically her underwear and leggings. This DNA, identified as belonging to an unknown male, did not match any Ramsey family member or known associates tested at the time. Lacey's letter emphasized that the DNA evidence pointed to intruder as the likely perpetrator, aligning with the theory long championed by the Ramseys and their private investigator, Lou Smith. The 2008 exoneration was a significant moment, as it shifted the official narrative away from the family, who had been under intense suspicion since the murder in 1996. John Ramsey, in a 2008 interview with the Denver Post, expressed relief, but also frustration that it took over a decade for the authorities to acknowledge this evidence, which had been available in some form since 1997, but not fully pursued due to early investigative biases. The DNA findings were seen as a vindication for the family, but they did not close the case, as no match for the DNA has ever been found in national databases, leaving the killer's identity unresolved. Despite the 2008 exoneration, public opinion remains deeply divided, largely due to the overwhelming influence of media coverage in the case's early years. From the moment JonBenét's death was reported, the media frenzy painted the Ramseys as suspicious figures, focusing on the unusual ransom note demanding $118,000, nearly identical to John Ramsey's Christmas bonus, the lack of clear signs of forced entry, and the family's decision to hire lawyers and delay police interviews. Tabloids and mainstream outlets alike sensationalized the case, speculating about Patsy's possible involvement, due to similarities between her handwriting and the ransom note, and even suggesting Burke, then 9 years old, could have been responsible. A 1997 Vanity Fair article and subsequent TV specials amplified these theories, portraying the Ramseys as a dysfunctional family hiding dark secrets. This early media narrative, combined with the Boulder police's initial focus on the family as primary suspects, cemented a perception of guilt in the minds of many. Even after the DNA exoneration, a 2016 CBS documentary, The Case of JonBenét Ramsey, reignited public skepticism by suggesting Burke's involvement, despite the DNA evidence. In a 2024 People magazine poll, nearly 40% of respondents still believed the Ramseys were involved, illustrating how the initial media portrayal created a lasting schism that the 2008 exoneration could not fully bridge. John Ramsey himself acknowledged this in a 2024 Denver 7 interview, noting that 5–10% of people will never believe us, no matter the evidence, reflecting the enduring impact of early media framing. Burke Ramsey's legal battles against media outlets further underscore the family's struggle against what they perceive as defamatory coverage. In 2016, Burke, then 29, filed a $750 million defamation lawsuit against CBS and the producers of the Case of JonBenét Ramsey documentary, which concluded that he likely killed his sister accidentally and that his parents covered it up. The documentary relied on expert analysis of the crime scene and Burke's childhood behavior, but it ignored the 2008 DNA exoneration and presented speculative theories as fact. Burke's lawsuit, filed in Michigan, argued that the documentary caused irreparable harm to his reputation, painting him as a murderer without evidence. In 2019, the case was settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, with CBS issuing no public retraction, but agreeing to a confidential resolution. Earlier, in 1999, the Ramsays had successfully sued the Star tabloid for suggesting Burke's involvement, securing a settlement that included an apology. These lawsuits highlight Burke's efforts to combat what the family viewed as reckless media accusations, but they also contributed to the perception of the Ramsays as litigious, potentially reinforcing public skepticism. In a 2016 Dr. Phil interview, Burke expressed frustration that the media twisted his childhood demeanor, described as shy and awkward, into evidence of guilt, a narrative that persisted despite his exoneration by DNA evidence. The Ramsey family's response to media scrutiny, while legally defensible, carries elements that could be seen as negatively leading, particularly in how they framed their lawsuits and public statements. By aggressively pursuing legal action, the family sought to control the narrative and suppress speculation, but this approach sometimes appeared to deflect legitimate questions about the case. For instance, their early decision to hire a public relations firm and limit police cooperation, as noted in a 1997 Boulder Daily Camera report, created an impression of defensiveness that clashed with their claims of transparency. John Ramsey's 2024 comments on 48 Hours, where he dismissed public skeptics as a small minority while simultaneously lamenting reputational damage, could be viewed as contradictory, minimizing valid concerns while emphasizing victimhood. Similarly, Burke's Dr. Phil appearance, while intended to humanize him, came across to some as staged, as he smiled and appeared detached when discussing his sister's death, which fueled further speculation rather than quelling it. These actions, while aimed at correcting misinformation, risked reinforcing a narrative of evasion, as they focused on silencing critics, rather than addressing unresolved aspects of the case, such as the ransom note's origins or the family's behavior on the day of the murder. The interplay of the 2008 DNA exoneration, persistent public division, and Burke's lawsuits illustrates the complex legacy of the JonBenéт Ramsey case. The DNA evidence provided a scientific basis for clearing the family, but the early media storm, fueled by sensationalism and investigative leaks, created a narrative of suspicion that proved difficult to dismantle. Burke's legal actions against CBS and others were a direct response to this media-driven skepticism, but they also highlighted the family's ongoing battle to reshape their image, rather than fully engaging with the broader investigation. The public's divided reaction, as seen in polls and online discussions on platforms like Reddit in 2024, reflects the enduring power of initial media portrayals over later evidence. While the Ramsays have been officially cleared, the lack of a definitive suspect and the case's unresolved status continue to fuel debate, with the family's defensive posture occasionally contributing to perceptions of obfuscation. Until new evidence, such as a DNA match through genealogical testing, emerges, the JonBenéт Ramsey case will likely remain a flashpoint for controversy, shaped as much by media narratives and legal battles as by the facts themselves. Between 2023 and 2025, advancements in DNA processing and partnerships with leading U.S. forensic laboratories, such as Boulder Technology and LA-certified, TFA-accredited facilities, have reinvigorated efforts to resolve the JonBenéт Ramsey case. These labs have meticulously re-examined physical evidence, including JonBenét's clothing, underwear and leggings, the nylon cord used in her murder, and household items like a rope and blanket. Utilizing cutting-edge techniques like next-generation sequencing, NGS, and direct polymerase chain reaction, PCR, investigators can now analyze trace DNA previously deemed too degraded for profiling. A 2024 National Institute of Justice report highlights that direct PCR generates complete DNA profiles in under 3 hours, cutting reagent costs by 25% compared to traditional methods. This technology excels with materials like polyester, plastic slides, and metal tools found in the Ramsey home, but struggles with denim or wool, which yield lower quality profiles. The re-examination process emphasizes preserving sufficient samples for future testing, adhering to updated federal quality assurance standards to minimize contamination. A persistent issue in the case has early mishandling. Cindy Mara and the Smith team, building on the late investigator Lou Smith's work, have driven an independent investigation parallel to the Boulder Police Department's efforts. Smith, who resigned in 1998 over the police's focus on the Ramsey family, left a list of 887 suspects tied to his intruder theory. Mara, a forensic consultant, has led efforts to exclude individuals from this list, reporting in a 2024 Denver 7 press release that over 25 suspects were cleared using YSTR profiling, which targets male-specific DNA. Samples stored in robotic freezers at 20 °C, as per a 2022 family tree DNA protocol, ensure integrity, while high-throughput robotic systems and software reduce human error. The team's focus on overlooked evidence, like a high-tech boot print and stun gun marks, aims to shift the narrative toward an external perpetrator, though a 2023 Boulder Daily Camera editorial suggests their approach may fully emphasize intruder-related leads. A significant breakthrough has been the application of investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, using genealogical algorithms to trace the unidentified male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing. By uploading the profile to databases like GeneMatch, the Smith team, with genealogists, leverages single nucleotide polymorphisms, SNPs, to identify distant relatives, as detailed in a 2022 Science Direct article. Improved storage protocols, dry, room temperature environments or robotic freezers, minimize degradation, while strict measures like negative controls and protective suits reduce contamination risks, per a 2024 SCI published report. These advancements enhance the chances of generating a usable profile from trace DNA, once considered unviable. Public perception remains polarized due to early media sensationalism and investigative errors. The 2008 DNA exoneration of the Ramseys, based on the same unidentified male DNA, was pivotal, yet a 2024 People poll found 38% still suspect the family. Burke Ramsey's 2016 lawsuit against CBS for its speculative documentary, settled in 2019, underscores the family's battle against defamatory narratives. The Boulder police, under Chief Stephen Redfern, claim to pursue DNA leads but withhold specifics, prompting John Ramsey's accusations of secrecy in a 2024 48 Hours interview. This lack of transparency fuels public distrust, complicating the case's progress. Future expectations hinge on identifying the DNA's owner, with John Ramsey predicting a match within 2 to 3 years in a 2025 CNN interview, citing the 40 million profiles in consumer DNA databases. Family Tree DNA, 2024. A match could reopen the case provided corroborating evidence, like the ransom note or boot print, links the individual to the crime. However, degraded samples may still fail to yield results, per a 2025 New York Times article, and ethical concerns about IgG privacy, noted in a 2024 SCIE published study, pose challenges. The Boulder police's hesitance to fully embrace independent testing, criticized by Ramsey, may delay progress unless public or Smith team pressure forces greater openness. The 2023-2025 efforts mark a hopeful chapter, but the case's resolution remains elusive, tangled in scientific, ethical, and historical complexities. The JonBenét Ramsey case, nearly 3 decades on, remains a haunting puzzle, with 2023-2025 marking a pivotal period of progress through advanced DNA processing and relentless independent efforts. Collaborations with top U.S. forensic labs and the Smith team's work, led by Cindy Mara, have re-examined critical evidence and excluded over 25 suspects, leveraging genealogical algorithms to trace unidentified male DNA. These advancements, supported by improved protocols to reduce contamination, offer hope for identifying the killer and reopening the investigation. Yet, the case's shadow lingers, shaped by early media sensationalism and investigative missteps that continue to divide public opinion. With 38% still doubting the Ramseys' 2008 DNA exoneration, per a 2024 People poll. Burke Ramsey's lawsuits against defamatory media narratives underscore the family's fight for redemption, but their defensive stance sometimes fuels skepticism. The Boulder police's cautious approach, withholding details as noted in a 2024 48 Hours interview, risks perpetuating distrust. As John Ramsey pins hopes on a DNA match within years, The case teeters between scientific promise and enduring challenges, degraded samples, ethical concerns, and a polarized public. The quest for justice for JonBené persists, a poignant reminder of a tragedy unresolved, awaiting the breakthrough that could finally illuminate the truth.